I will never forget my first visit to Ravenwood Cemetery. The place was established in the early 1800s and had long since been abandoned. The first thing that struck me was how overgrown and decayed the graves were. It felt like a scene straight out of a horror story. I'd heard tales of this place resembling a true horror movie, with paranormal activity thriving within its boundaries. The locals whispered about a curse that had befallen Ravenwood in the late 19th century. There were sudden, unexplained deaths that left victims with expressions of sheer terror. The atmosphere was like walking into a horror short film. I felt an eerie chill as I walked among the graves, much like the unsettling tales shared on horror podcasts. As I ventured deeper into the cemetery, I noticed the grounds had become a haven for ghost hunters and fans of analog horror. They hoped to capture evidence of the paranormal on their CCTV cameras. The spirits of those who died mysteriously haunted the place. There were countless reports of eerie sightings, ghostly apparitions, and strange sounds coming from the cemetery at night. It felt like a scene straight out of The Conjuring or a Halloween horror movie. One cold autumn night, I decided to explore the cemetery alone, hoping to capture some spooky stories for my channel. As I walked among the graves, I saw a shadowy figure moving in the distance. It resembled Mr. Jameson, the old caretaker who had vanished without a trace. The figure seemed to warn me to leave, much like the spooky encounters reported on Reddit horror stories. I had heard that Mr. Jameson had a deep connection with the cemetery and treated it as his sanctuary. But one night he disappeared, leaving only his old lantern flickering at the entrance. Since then, visitors reported seeing a shadowy figure resembling him wandering among the graves. My heart raced as I felt a presence following me. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it towards the shadows, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Suddenly, a bone-chilling scream echoed through the cemetery. It was a creature with glowing eyes, much like a horror game come to life. The footage I captured showed an entity moving swiftly between the graves. I barely escaped with my life, leaving behind my equipment and sanity. This experience quickly became one of the most disturbing horror videos on the internet. As I delved deeper into the cemetery's history, I uncovered tales of vampires and skinwalkers, creatures of cosmic horror that added to the cemetery's terrifying reputation. It felt like a scene from the best horror movies, where the lines between reality and the supernatural blur. One story involved a family who moved into a house near the cemetery only to experience haunting encounters that forced them to flee. They claimed to see apparitions, hear unsettling horror sounds, and feel a constant sense of dread similar to the chilling scares in horror shorts. There's also the tale of the stalker, a mysterious figure seen wandering the cemetery at night. Some believe he is the spirit of a man who committed terrible crimes and is now doomed to roam the cemetery for eternity. His presence has been likened to the disturbing figures in horror movies and horror short films, always lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce. But the most terrifying encounter I found was the story of a group of teenagers who dared each other to spend a night in the cemetery on Halloween. They filmed their experience, hoping to create scary videos for their channel. What they caught on camera was far beyond their expectations. The footage showed eerie ghost videos with strange figures and unexplained movements, akin to the most disturbing horror videos on the internet. They reported feeling an evil presence, much like the demons and spirits encountered in horror games and movies. Chapter 2. The Weeping Woman. The tale of the Weeping Woman is one that has haunted the townspeople for generations. She was a mother whose child died suddenly and mysteriously. Overcome with grief, she spent every night at her child's grave, weeping inconsolably. One fateful night, she too disappeared without a trace. Locals believe that her spirit never left Ravenwood Cemetery. Visitors have reported hearing her sorrowful cries, especially on cold moonlit nights. Her wailing is so heart-wrenching that it has brought even the bravest men to their knees in fear. Some have claimed to see a ghostly figure dressed in a flowing white gown moving between the graves, her face obscured by long dark hair. A group of teenagers dared each other to spend a night in the cemetery on Halloween. They filmed their experience, hoping to create scary videos for their channel. What they caught on camera was far beyond their expectations. The footage showed eerie ghost videos with strange figures and unexplained movements, akin to the most disturbing horror videos on the internet. They reported feeling an evil presence, much like the demons and spirits encountered in horror games and movies. The Weeping Woman's legend is a chilling reminder of how grief can transcend the boundaries between the living and the dead. Her story is one of many that have made Ravenwood Cemetery a place of fear and fascination. The most chilling part is when she lifts her head, her face a mask of sorrow and pain, and then she disappears into the night, leaving behind a trail of cold air and sorrow. One visitor, who dared to stay after dark, recounted his encounter with the Weeping Woman. He had heard the stories but didn't believe them until he saw her. He described her as a spectral figure, her white gown glowing in the moonlight, her cries filling the air with an eerie sadness. He watched in horror as she floated between the graves, her hands clutching a small, tattered blanket. When she noticed him, her eyes locked onto his, filled with an unimaginable sorrow. He ran, but her cries followed him, haunting his dreams for months. Chapter 3. The Stalker of Ravenwood. There's also the tale of the Stalker, a mysterious figure seen wandering the cemetery at night. Some believe he is the spirit of a man who committed terrible crimes and is now doomed to roam the cemetery for eternity. His presence has been likened to the disturbing figures in horror movies and horror short films, always lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce. The stalker is often described as a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes that pierce the darkness. He is said to follow visitors, staying just out of sight, but always making his presence known. Those who have encountered him describe an overwhelming sense of dread, as if they are being watched by something evil. One night, a group of urban explorers ventured into the cemetery, armed with dash cams and flashlights. They hoped to capture footage of the paranormal. What they found was beyond their worst nightmares. They encountered a creature with glowing eyes, much like a horror game come to life. The footage they captured showed an entity moving swiftly between the graves, emitting a bone-chilling scream. They barely escaped with their lives, leaving behind their equipment and their sanity. There are stories of the stalker dragging people into the depths of the cemetery, never to be seen again. His victims are often found with expressions of sheer terror, much like the unfortunate souls in a true crime story. The stalker's legend has become a part of Ravenwood's dark history, making it a place where the living fear to tread. Some say the stalker is the spirit of a man who was wrongly accused and executed for crimes he didn't commit. His anger and desire for revenge keep him tethered to Ravenwood, forever haunting the place of his unjust death. Others believe he is a demon, attracted to the negative energy of the cemetery, preying on the fear and despair of visitors. One particularly disturbing encounter involved a lone camper who decided to spend a night near the cemetery. He reported seeing a figure watching him from the tree line. Throughout the night, the figure got closer and closer until it was standing right outside his tent. He described it as having glowing eyes and an aura of pure evil. He fled in terror, leaving behind all his belongings. When he returned with help the next day, there was no trace of the stalker, but his campsite was completely destroyed. Next, we have the story of a family that dared to camp near the cemetery. John and Mary took their 2 children, Emma and Ben, for a weekend getaway in nature. They found a picturesque spot by a babbling brook surrounded by tall pines. The first night was uneventful and the family enjoyed their time together, but on the second night things took a sinister turn. Emma woke up in the middle of the night saying she saw a man standing outside their tent. John checked but found nothing. He reassured Emma it was just a dream and put her back to bed. The next day, they found strange markings on the trees around their campsite. They looked like runes or symbols, but none of them could decipher their meaning. That night, Emma and Ben both woke up screaming, saying the man was back, standing at the edge of the campsite, just watching them. John and Mary decided to keep watch, taking turns staying awake. Around midnight, Mary heard footsteps approaching their tent. She shone her flashlight outside but saw nothing. The footsteps continued, circling their tent, growing louder and more insistent. Suddenly, the tent flap flew open and a gust of freezing wind blew inside. They grabbed their children and fled to their car, driving away as fast as they could. They never went back to that campsite, but they later learned that the area was notorious for strange disappearances and ghost sightings. The man Emma and Ben saw was believed to be the spirit of a missing hiker who had vanished years ago. The family never spoke of their terrifying experience again, but the haunted campsite remained etched in their memories. There are other stories of campers near Ravenwood experiencing similar hauntings. Strange noises in the night, ghostly apparitions, and a constant feeling of being watched. Some have even reported seeing shadowy figures moving among the trees, much like the weeping woman and the stalker. These encounters have made the area notorious for its supernatural activity, attracting thrill-seekers and ghost hunters alike. One camper recounted his experience of waking up to find his tent surrounded by mist. As he stepped out, he saw a figure standing in the distance watching him. The figure slowly approached, its features becoming clearer. It was a man, but his face was distorted, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The camper fled, his heart pounding in his chest. He described the figure as looking like a smooth criminal, with an unsettlingly calm demeanor that only added to the terror. Our final story takes us to the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. A young couple, Tom and Alice, decided to go on a camping trip to celebrate their anniversary. They found a secluded spot by a serene lake, miles away from civilization. It was perfect, or so they thought. The first night was peaceful, with the sounds of the lake lulling them to sleep. But on the second night, Alice woke up with an uneasy feeling. She thought she heard footsteps outside their tent. She woke Tom, but he dismissed it as an animal and went back to sleep. Alice, however, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning they found strange footprints around their campsite. They were human, but too large and too deep to be an ordinary person. Tom tried to reassure Alice, but she couldn't shake her fear. That night, the footsteps returned, circling their tent closer and closer. Tom, now alarmed, grabbed his hunting knife and flashlight, ready to confront whatever was out there. As he stepped outside, the footsteps stopped. The forest was eerily silent. Tom searched the area but found nothing. They decided to cut their trip short and leave the next morning. But as they packed up their gear, they found a crude wooden doll hanging from a tree near their tent. It looked like a human figure, bound with string, and its face was painted with a grotesque, mocking grin. Terrified, they hurried to pack up and leave. As they drove away, Alice looked back and saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest watching them. It was tall, with unnaturally long limbs and glowing eyes. They never spoke of their experience to anyone, but the memory of the Watcher haunted them for the rest of their lives. The Watcher is believed to be a spirit or entity that guards the forest near Ravenwood Cemetery. Those who have encountered it describe an overwhelming sense of dread and an unshakable feeling of being watched. Its appearance is often preceded by strange phenomena such as unnatural sounds, sudden temperature drops, and the appearance of eerie symbols or objects. One hiker reported finding a series of wooden dolls hanging from trees, each one more grotesque than the last. As he ventured deeper into the forest, he felt a presence following him. When he turned around, he saw the Watcher standing in the distance, its eyes glowing in the dim light. He fled, but the memory of those glowing eyes stayed with him, haunting his dreams. These stories are just the beginning of the dark secrets that Ravenwood Cemetery holds. The area is notorious for strange disappearances and ghost sightings, with locals believing that the cemetery is a portal to another realm. It's a place where the supernatural meets reality, and the line between the living and the dead is blurred. Stay tuned for more terrifying tales, and remember, some places are best left undisturbed. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and beware the dark corners of the world.